The story of this woman written in the book of Ruth is set in the time of the Judges. If you look at the Bible, there are two books, Judges and Ruth, and it's fine for us to read them together as a continuous story. So, what is the period of the Judges? After being freed from Egypt, the Israelites wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. And then, under Joshua's leadership, they settled in Canaan. Once they settled in Canaan, they lived faithfully serving God, but then Joshua died. After that, they entered the period of darkness. By God's grace, they were able to settle in Canaan, but they forgot God's grace and began to worship idols. After Joshua, when they worshiped idols, neighboring nations like the Philistines began to oppress Israel. Then Israel would repent again. They would cry out, God, please help us. Then God would send someone to them. That person is called a judge, shopit. The word means to rule or to judge. And this judge saves the people of Israel. How many times does this cycle repeat? It happens 12 times. It continues until Israel's first king, Saul, is established. This period is called the era of the Judges. So, what was the era of the Judges like in the book of Ruth? Today we look at Ruth chapter 1 verse 1. But if you look at the last chapter and last verse of Judges, it is recorded like this. In Judges 21:25 it says, in those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. People did what was right in their own eyes. That's how it is written. The original word for eyes here is the Hebrew word ayin, which means eye. Eye, our eyes. So what kind of situation were they in? It was a situation where they acted according to what seemed good in their own eyes. They did as their eyes were satisfied, as their eyes were drawn. They had no interest in God's eyes. Having no interest in God's eyes means having no interest in God's will. So, in the last verse of Judges and the first verse of Ruth, we see these kinds of words. Their situation was that they lived according to what their eyes were drawn to, but what happened next? A famine came. So, what does it mean that a famine came to the land of Bethlehem? It means that when they lived according to what their eyes desired, God disciplined them. Everyone, as we go through life, there are times when we encounter hardships. There are times when we face famine. When we encounter hardship and famine, we cannot say that the cause of every hardship, the cause of every famine, is always because we lived according to what our eyes desired, apart from God's eyes. Because there are cases where that's not true. However, for those of us who fear God, when a famine comes into our lives, and famine here does not only refer to economic hardship. When we encounter unfavorable circumstances in life or face events we did not want, that too is a kind of famine. When we encounter such a famine as people who serve God, when we stand before those circumstances, we must examine ourselves. We need to reflect on whether we have been living with God's eyes in mind, or if we've only been living according to what our own eyes are drawn to. A famine came to Bethlehem in the land of Judah. But as we see, the head of a household named Elimelech took his wife and 2 sons and left for Moab. If the famine that came to Bethlehem in Judah had been truly severe, would Elimelech have been the only one to leave? Many people would have had to leave that place. However, the Bible does not mention that many people left. It doesn't say many people left because of the famine, and among them was a man named Elimelech. It is not recorded that way. Rather, as we read today in Ruth chapter 1 verse 1, it says, in the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. A man from Bethlehem in Judah went to live for a while in the country of Moab with his wife and 2 sons. Not that many people left the land because of the famine, but rather it was one man from Bethlehem, a man named Elimelech, who left. Looking at it this way, we can think, the famine that occurred there must not have been a severe one. There was a famine. However, that famine was not an extreme one. That's indeed how we can see it. Then if it wasn't a severe famine, why did this family leave Bethlehem? There is a book on this topic written by Pastor Hong Sung Han. In his book, Walking Through the Forest of the Old Testament, I found something like this. According to ancient records, what happened to the wealthy when a famine struck at that time? They had to open up their storehouses. They had to open their storehouses and distribute their grain during the famine. So it seems that Elimelech and his family, perhaps feeling burdened about opening their storehouse during the famine, decided to sell off everything they had and leave. The book mentions the opinion that they emigrated together as a family. I think that opinion is quite reasonable, because after her husband and 2 sons died in Moab, Naomi returned to Bethlehem in Judah. When she returned to Bethlehem, she made this confession. In Ruth chapter 1 verse 21, it says, "I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. The Lord has afflicted me. The Almighty has brought misfortune upon me. So why call me Naomi?" There is the phrase, "I went away full." That sentence, there are 2 interpretations of "I went away full." One interpretation is that she left in financial abundance, and the second is that it wasn't about wealth, but rather that she left with a full family. She had her husband, her 2 sons. So there are these 2 interpretations of leaving full. So what does "went away full" mean here? If you look at the context before and after this sentence, you'll see that both interpretations are included. She was financially well off, and she also left with her husband and 2 sons, so she left with abundance in both respects. Because they were well off, because they had financial abundance, it was easier for them to settle in the country they immigrated to. And since they had some financial backing, when it came time for the sons to marry women from that country, the local families were willing to give their daughters to immigrants, likely because the family was financially stable. So there is a tendency to view it this way. The 2 sons got married there, and now they are living their lives in that place. But then, painful and bitter events began to happen in this family. The husband suddenly passed away. It wasn't that the husband was sick for a long time and then gradually passed away. He died suddenly. How much pain must she have felt when her husband suddenly passed away? They had come to this foreign country hoping for a better life, but then her husband suddenly died. But her 2 sons comforted their mother. "Mother, you have us, don't you? We will be your strength and give you courage. So, mother, please stay strong." Hearing her 2 sons' words, the mother gains courage. She finds strength. But then one day, both sons also pass away. In this way, Naomi loses her husband in the land of Moab, and she loses her 2 sons as well. Truly, as she went through life, she kept encountering bitter experiences. Generally, people want a sweet life as they go through life. They want a joyful life and a happy life. Who would ever wish to encounter bitter experiences while living? There is no one like that. Naomi also truly wanted to live a sweet life. So when the famine struck, she said, "Let's escape this famine and go to a place of abundance." And Naomi even chose her name to mean sweet, because she wanted to live a sweet life. The name Naomi means sweet. Naomi wanted her life to be sweet, happy, peaceful, and joyful. However, even though she had such hopes, her life ended up becoming bitter. So when she returned to Bethlehem in the land of Judah, people said, "Naomi has come back." When they called her that, in Ruth 1:20, Naomi said to them, "Do not call me Naomi, call me Mara, because the Almighty has made my life very bitter. Do not call me Naomi, which means joy and sweetness. My life is Mara. It is a bitter life. Now then, she wanted her life to be joyful and sweet. So why did it become such a bitter life? Why does the Bible say from her own lips, do not call me Naomi? Why does it say here, call me a woman who has encountered this bitter life? Today, we looked at the passage from Ruth chapter 1, verses 1 to 14. This passage from Ruth 1 to 1-14 can be divided into two sections. The first section is from verses 1 to 5. If you look at the content from verses 1 to 5, only sad things are mentioned. There was a famine in that land. Because of the famine in Bethlehem, this family emigrated. They went to another country. But after going to another country, the husband passed away. And both sons also died? It's really just a story full of bitterness. If you look at verses 1 to 5, it's only bitter stories that appear. Not even once is the word Yahweh or God mentioned. It doesn't appear even a single time. Why is it not mentioned even once? It's about the circumstances when the famine came, the situation when they left for Moab, and how they lived while in Moab. It's because they lived according to their own judgment. Judgment, ahim, eyes. They lived in a direction that seemed right in their own eyes. When they faced famine, they didn't look at it through God's eyes, but through their own eyes. Even when they left from Moab, it wasn't with God's perspective, but according to their own eyes and their own calculations. Even while living in Moab, they didn't consider God's perspective, but lived according to wherever their own eyes led them. So, what is the cause of a bitter life? It's living according to one's own judgment. It's living as one's own eyes lead. A bitter life. When we think of a bitter life, we tend to think of bitter circumstance. That's true, a bitter life, bitter circumstances. But then, is the Bible, through the book of Ruth, only talking to us about a bitter life and bitter circumstances? That's not the case. What is it that this message in the book of Ruth is trying to give us? What it's saying is that living your life simply following wherever your own eyes are drawn, that itself is a bitter life. Living according to what your own eyes desire, that itself is a bitter life. From verses 1 to 5, the word God is never mentioned. And when we look at these verses, all we see are the bitter circumstances, meaning famine, losing a husband, losing sons. But what is a bitter life? A bitter life is when, as we live, we have no interest in God's perspective and simply live according to what seems good in our own eyes. And the second section is from Ruth chapter 1, verses 6 to 14, where Naomi, the mother-in-law, and her daughter-in-law Ruth set out for Naomi's hometown. It's about their return to Bethlehem in the land of Judah. But in this account of their return, they keep seeking God. They continually seek after God. The words God and Yahweh keep appearing. In Ruth chapter 1, verse 6, it says that Yahweh cared for his people. In Ruth chapter 1, verse 8, it says, may Yahweh show you kindness. And in verse 9, may Yahweh grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband. In Ruth chapter 1, verse 13, it says, the hand of Yahweh has gone out against me. The word that keeps appearing is God. So, what is this second paragraph about? It means that she began to look at everything through God's eyes. She used to see everything through her own eyes, but now she has started to see everything through God's eyes. Generally, when people encounter a bad situation, what kind of words and feelings do they have? I ended up in this situation because of so-and-so. It's because of those bad people. I suffered at their hands, and that's why I'm in this situation. Or because my surroundings are like this. My life is in an environment where nothing good can happen anymore. We tend to blame our circumstances or certain people feeling that grows stronger. And also, why didn't God protect someone like me from this? Those kinds of feelings start to well up inside. But what about Naomi? What did she do? She didn't blame other people. She didn't say, it's because those unlucky daughters-in-law came into the family that all this happened. She didn't do that. And she didn't say, it's because I came to this place called Moab that all this happened. She didn't blame her circumstances either. Ruth used to look at everything through her own eyes, but now that's changed. In a way, you could say she has been restored. Now, she became aware again of God's gaze, which she had forgotten and lost. And she began to be captivated once again by God's gaze, the God she had forgotten in her own thoughts. Everyone, when you encounter bitter pain in life, don't forget this. I bless you in the name of the Lord, that you would not look at your circumstances through your own eyes, but that if you restore God's perspective and His will, you will be able to overcome the bitter pain you face today. Naomi and Ruth have now returned to Bethlehem in the land of Judah. After returning to Bethlehem, they did not give up, but continued to live by faith. They lived with an awareness of God's perspective, conscious of Him in their daily life. When you live with an awareness of God, even in situations where it would be easy to give up, what happens when you choose not to give up? They were given the opportunity to meet Boaz, a powerful man who could act as their kinsman redeemer. So, what is it that we need to realize through the book of Ruth? When Naomi and Ruth's faith in God was restored, when their faith was renewed, Ruth met a good man, remarried, and things turned out well for her. Is that what this story is trying to tell us? No, it's not. It's not simply about meeting a good man and getting remarried. That's not the point. The book of Ruth ends like this. In Ruth chapter 4, verses 21 to 22, it says, Salmon was the father of Boaz. Boaz was the father of Obed. Obed was the father of Jesse. And Jesse was the father of David. That's how it's written. Ruth meets a man named Boaz. She remarries. After Ruth marries Boaz, later on, she gives birth to Obed, who becomes the grandfather of King David. So, Ruth became the great-grandmother of King David, the greatest king in Israel's history. What's important here? Did Naomi, the mother-in-law, or Ruth, the daughter-in-law, ever imagine that by restoring their faith in God and seeing the world through His eyes, they would become the great-grandmothers of King David? They had no idea. They never even dreamed of such a thing. Why not? Because these events happened after Naomi had already passed away, and they took place years after Ruth had died as well. So it's not that they knew such amazing glory and blessings awaited them. These were glorious and blessed events that would happen in the future. But then, what is the lesson that the Bible is giving us through the content of the book of Ruth? Is it simply that she met a good man named Boaz, remarried, and her life improved a bit? That's not it. What this is telling us is that seeing the world through God's eyes and living our lives with God's perspective is itself a great blessing and glory for our future. Everyone, what a blessing and glory. It is showing us through the book of Ruth today that being conscious of God's eyes and relying on Him as we live is the greatest blessing and glory. Everyone, do you have the conviction today of just how great a glory and blessing it is for us to live with an awareness of God's eyes and with reverence for Him? I bless you in the name of the Lord that you may regain that conviction today. When I read the words in the book of Ruth about facing truly difficult times in a foreign land, it reminds me of a certain event. It was when I was attending seminary in Paraguay. I was attending seminary while serving at the Full Gospel Church in Paraguay. And a truly sad event happened at our church. What happened was that a family immigrated there. The couple came with their 2 daughters and 2 sons. They ran a small grocery store in the neighborhood. They had immigrated all the way to Paraguay, hoping for a better life. But one day, the husband suddenly passed away. The deaconess worked hard to raise her 2 daughters and 2 sons. She would bring her young children to church for worship, and whenever there was a need for volunteers at church, she would step up and help. But then, one day, this deaconess also passed away due to illness. Now, the head of the household was the eldest daughter. But how old was she? At that time, she was 16 years old. Her younger sister was 14. The brother below her was 11. And the youngest was 7. So this 16-year-old girl became the head of the family. She also had a younger sister right below her in age. She was very close with this younger sister who was just below her. She would come over to my house to hang out. We were really close. Everyone at church, including the congregation and the pastor, felt truly heartbroken. We held a funeral service. I still remember the order of the funeral service even now. I remember the 2 young daughters wearing white mourning clothes during the funeral service. And the 2 little kids were just playing around. The sons, because they didn't understand the situation, all the church members wondered, how will those kids be able to go on living? Everyone felt that way. Since I was a seminary student, I attended every church service, and even at the Wednesday evening service, the 16-year-old girl, who was now the head of the family, would bring the kids and come to the evening worship. They would also come to the evening service on Fridays. The little kids would lie down and sleep at church, while their older sister attended the service. They would also attend Sunday worship, and at that time, our church would collect offerings. The pastor would call out everyone's names from the pulpit. He would also read out the reasons for the Thanksgiving offerings. But really, they would give tithes and Thanksgiving offerings and so on. In that kind of environment, I watched those scenes for a while, and then I left Paraguay to help plant a church in Ecuador. After I left, I completely forgot about it. I have forgotten all about it and was just living my life. Before I came to our church, I was pastoring in LA and enrolled in a doctoral program in Fullerton. One Sunday, before preaching, I was leading worship and singing hymns when someone walked into the sanctuary person who looked very familiar. Who is that? I feel like I've seen them somewhere before. The service ended. The first service was over, and it was time for the second. After it finished, a woman walked briskly up to me and said, "Opa, don't you recognize me?" That's what she said. But I couldn't think of any woman I'd been close enough with to call me Opa. So I looked at her closely and realized, oh, it was her. She was chubby back then too. But now that she's married and older, she's even chubbier. Wow, it's really been a long time. The second service ends a little after 12, so we all had lunch together in the church cafeteria. Catching up a bit though, I couldn't ask everything, like how everyone's been doing. Those 4 siblings, they said they had been in Paraguay and then immigrated again to the US. They came to New York. So the younger siblings are all doing well too. She said, "I run a business in New York, but I came to LA for work this time. And when I heard that my brother was pastoring at a church in LA, I decided to come find him." You know, immigration is tough coming here after losing both parents. In a place with no relatives, nothing familiar at all. Who helped them overcome those hardships and survive? Everyone is busy trying to make a living as immigrants. What help could even fellow church members really offer? But God gave these 4 siblings the strength to live, protected them, and guided them. Why did something like this happen to our family? Even though our mom and dad went to church, they wondered, why is this happening? But instead of looking at the world through their own eyes, they looked at it through God's eyes. And as they faced their circumstances from that perspective, they were able to overcome those bitter hardships. Everyone, the world is not easy. There are very few people who say that living in this world is easy. It's not easy. Why not? Because we can encounter things we don't want to happen. Even so, the reason we can overcome those bitter circumstances is not because of our own willpower or determination. Those have their limits. Only the one who made us, the one who created us, the God who knows me better than I know myself, can truly help us. What would have happened to this family if God had not been with them? What does it mean that this family was able to overcome such difficult and bitter circumstances because God was present in their home and because their children kept looking to God and moving forward? As we go through life, we live by serving God. My religion is Protestantism. I go to church, but that's not all. I bless you in the name of the Lord, that through the book of Ruth, you may realize just how great a blessing, how great an honor, and how great a grace it is to live your life serving God. I bless you in the name of the Lord, that today, as you worship and serve God, you may once again realize that serving God is such a benefit and happiness for